So Friday we spent talking about the vascular plants and their characteristics. Today we're going to move on to non-vascular plants. I think there's a little bit of a review first, and then we'll get right into the notes. If you're doing your if you're doing your notes by hand, this is how you want to set up your page. The title is Characteristics of Non-Vascular Plants. These are going to be notes number 9. Again, make sure you have your name at the top, your divider line with general topics on the left, and details on the right. You guys have probably memorized that by now. All right, so just as a review, the plant kingdom is divided into two main subphyla. We've got vascular and non-vascular, okay? The difference being that vascular has those tube-like structures that help transfer water and minerals throughout the plant, and then non-vascular does not have those tubes. Another word I told you to remember instead of tubes was veins, okay? The V in vascular, let that remind you of the word veins. So vascular plants do have veins, while non-vascular are like non-veins. They do not have veins. Friday we talked about the different groups on the vascular side. Today we're going to talk about just the non-vascular group. The main phyla, or really the only group of non-vascular plants, is called bryophytes. So if the plant is a non-vascular plant, does not have tubes or veins, then it's automatically classified into the bryophyte category. There are 3 main examples. There are more than just 3, but these are the 3 most common. And we'll look at each of them a little bit more in depth just because they're kind of interesting and a little bit easier to study than the hundreds and thousands of vascular plants. So the 3 main bryophytes are mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. And we'll get into those in just a little bit. Okay, so here's the review of non-vascular plants from the previous lesson, I believe 2, maybe 3 lessons ago. There's only one main group of non-vascular plants, and these are known as the bryophytes. Okay, bryophyta, I think is the Latin for it. Examples of these are the mosses. Oh, just kidding. That's the bryophyta. Liverworts, Marchiantophyta, and hornworts. Something, something, something. Can't see it because of the picture. So, but those are 3 main groups. Mosses look like this. Okay, I told you the story before about, if you watched the video at least, about when I was younger, my friends and I were playing down by the lake, and we were making our own little forts, and we would oftentimes pull up the moss and try to kind of pat it down at our fort area because we wanted to have green carpets in our fort. So that's the moss. Liverworts look more like this. We'll get into why they're called liverworts in a little bit, but just notice their lobe-like structure. Okay, kind of like the shape of your earlobe, that little like half circle piece that kind of hangs down. That's kind of what these plants have all over them, is these little lobes or bulges almost, so to speak. And then the hornworts, very easily recognizable with the big old spiky things. Okay? Okay, so how are non-vascular plants different? Here's the big thing. They do not have those organs that vascular plants have. They do not have true roots, stems, or leaves. They do have root-like and leaf-like parts throughout throughout the organism's body, but they don't have true roots, true stems, or true leaves because they don't have the tubes to be able to transport water to those different organs. Okay, they're not able to get water from one organ to the next, therefore they really don't have separate organs. Each of the cells does their own job. I love this little minion guy, he's so cute. So, non-vascular plants, this is the one to write down for your notes if you're doing the printed off version. Non-vascular plants do not have true stems, roots, leaves, or flowers. None of those organs that thrive from water being transported to them would be the case for non-vascular because they don't have the ability to transport that water to them. Therefore, non-vascular plants also do not have tubes or specialized tissue, which again, both of these words should make you think of that V word, veins, okay? They do not have tubes, specialized tissue, or veins to transport the water, nutrients, and minerals, okay? It's shocking, right? But they still get those water and nutrients and minerals just in a different way. Instead, see as this guy's saying right here, instead of specialized tissue or tubes, non-vascular plants absorb water directly into their cells. through a process called osmosis and diffusion. Okay, we talked a little bit before about diffusion, how most people can think of the word or think of the object like a diffuser, like an essential oils diffuser. Your mom may, or relative or someone you know may have one at home. And the whole point of the diffuser is it starts releasing the smell and the oils and the benefits in the corner or wherever in the room. But the goal is that it would eventually spread throughout the whole room. Through the process of diffusion, it begins to kind of spread out. The same thing happens with water when it goes into the non-vascular plant cells. Instead of the uh, tube or vein having to transport the water, those cells will absorb it directly. And I kind of like to describe it like a paper towel, right? A paper towel is not going to get wet in a certain spot unless a spot near that spot is touching the water, or unless that spot in particular is touching the water, okay? Same thing happens for non-vascular plants. In order for any of these little shrub-looking things down here to get water, they have to be touching it directly, okay? That's why non-vascular plants are generally so much smaller than vascular plants. They can't grow up tall because if they did, let's say for example like a tree, this top part of the tree would begin to die off because it's not able to get the water. They can't transport the water from here to up here. So instead, they just stay short, small, and close to the ground. That way every part of their body is touching the ground that needs to be. Because these types of plants, the non-vascular ones, absorb water directly into their cells, non-vascular plants need to live close to water. You are never going to find a non-vascular plant living not near water, okay, or at least not for very long. Non-vascular plants are also smaller because of this reason, which I just explained in the last slide. But all three of those, mosses, liverworts, and hornworts, typically live or can be found in a marshy, kind of wet rainforest-like kind of area. You're not going to find them in your typical dry regions. It's got to be wet, it's got to be moist, moist enough for these plants to survive. If you're doing the handwritten notes, these are just a few of the characteristics for non-vascular plants. They do not have true roots, stems, or leaves or flowers. They do not have tubes or veins to transport water, nutrients, and minerals. Instead, they get water by absorbing it directly into their cells through osmosis and diffusion. I put this little note here, like a paper towel. If you're doing the printed version, I suggest writing that somewhere as well. I think it's a really easy way to kind of distinguish those two things. Because of this, they are smaller and must be close to touching water. Okay, so another way to think about it is this. If you have a human being, right, let's say me, for example, give myself some hair here. Okay, if I want the top of my head up here to get wet, okay, that's not going to happen by just dipping my toes in water, right? I can keep my toes in that water all day long. Does not mean my head is going to get wet, okay? In order for my top of my head to get wet, this part of my head has to actually be touching the water. It's not going to just spread from here all the way to up here, okay? The same thing is true for non-vascular plants. In order for the plant to be to have to get water to its cells where it needs it, it has to actually be touching that part of the water. Whereas vascular plants, okay, even if this tall part of the tree, even if up here needs to get water, it can still get that because inside of the tree are those tubes that will take the water from the ground all the way up to the top where it's needed. Okay? So that's the difference between vascular and non-vascular, or at least one difference. Okay, first type of non-vascular plant, mosses. These are the most numerous and honestly the most common of non-vascular plant types. They resemble green carpets of vegetation. Looks like a little green carpet covering whatever it is that's growing on. These will always thrive or live and live well in moist areas, and they can grow on rocks, trees, sand dunes, concrete, and glaciers. Remember, these types of plants do not have true roots. So the reason why they can grow on something like concrete is they do not have to be able to dig deep into the dirt to be able to put their roots there. They have what's called a rhizoid, which I believe is on this side. Yep. Their roots are called rhizoids, and they're kind of like regular roots. You can see them a little bit in this picture on the left here. I don't know if you can see that arrow, but they're very thin, kind of wispy looking almost. So they do serve some purpose, but these thin kinds of roots, they don't grow deep into the ground, but they do spread out wide to the right and left. That's why mosses can grow on concrete and trees and things, even if they can't penetrate deep into it to be able to grow roots. The top part of the body, the green fluffy part, is called the thallus. Okay, so rhizoid is this kind of thin wispy root right here, and then the thallus is this top part. Okay. They do have stomata, so they do have those little mouths that are able to open and close selectively in order to either release gases or take in gases or release water or take in water, whatever it may be. And I skipped the first one on purpose, but I wanted to go back and explain it. But they do help prevent erosion, okay? If you look at, let me put a different color here. If you look at this picture here, ooh, there we go. If you look at this picture here, okay, you see the hillside obviously is covered with lots of green plants, lots of vegetation. Let's imagine for a second this hillside has no green plants on it whatsoever, and it's just a big mound of dirt. If there were to be heavy rainfall in that area, it would be pretty easy for that hillside to erode all the way down, right? The more rain runs over it, the more water will be carried down, have a lot more runoff situation, and eventually the hill's going to get smaller and smaller. But if these plants are growing on it, especially something like moss, okay? Moss kind of, instead of the water causing the dirt to shift around and flow down the hill, instead the moss kind of acts like a filter in keeping all the dirt in the mound, and the water just kind of runs over the moss instead of ruining the dirt underneath. So they can help prevent erosion on steep hillsides such as the one you see here. Okay, so I gave myself a little divider line here because I know the rest of the lesson is going to be talking about examples of non-vascular plants. So the first one is mosses. They're the most numerous of non-vascular plants. They resemble green carpets. That's why I have it in quotes here, kind of like it's a nickname. They're little green carpets. They thrive in moist areas and can grow on rocks, trees, concrete, etc. They help prevent erosion. The roots are called rhizoids while the body is called the thallus, and then they do have stomata. Okay, then this arrow here means I'm going on to the back to write my notes for liverworts and hornworts. So, liverworts. The name liverworts is derived from the lobe-like appearance. Okay, that means a shape kind of like this, kind of bubbly looking almost. The lobe-like appearance of their green plant body, okay, the top part of it. You can see it probably better in this picture over here. Almost like little semicircles or bulges, it kind of looks like. From the green plant body that look like the lobes of a liver. Okay, your liver has lobes on it shaped kind of like this, I guess, and hence where they get the name liverworts. There are two main types of liverworts, leafy liverworts and thallose liverworts. If I remember correctly from when I made this slide, these are the leafy looking ones and these are the thallose looking ones, a little more flat. And they do have rhizoids or root-like, those like thin kind of wispy roots. They'd be really easy to pull up if you were trying to, but they do have something that serves to kind of help hold them there, I suppose. Now, unlike mosses though, these do not have stomata, okay? They do have pores, just like if you were to look at your skin, you have pores on your body. Microscopic little holes that's what your sweat comes out of, that's where it can absorb water and nutrients and stuff through your skin, etc. Liverworts do not have stomata. They do have holes, kind of like the pores that we have on our skin, right? We can't necessarily selectively close or open our pores. They're pretty much open all the time. That's the same thing with liverworts. So instead of being able to voluntarily open or close those holes, they have air chambers below the surface of the thallus with tiny pores to permit gas exchange. However, because these pores cannot open and close like stomata, because they're just constantly open, liverworts are more susceptible to drying out than other bryophytes. Because these guys have their pores open all the time, it's very, very easy for them to dry out. They have to be kept pretty wet almost all the time, or they will dry up pretty quickly. So over here, my topic is liverworts, and then on the right side, I listed the details. They get their name because of their lobe-like body, because their lobe-like body resembles a liver. There are two main types, leafy and thallose. sounds like Thanos, but it's not. Thallus. They also have rhizoids, and they do not have stomata. Okay. Instead, they have pores that are always open, so these can dry out much more easily. And our last subgroup here, hornworts. Okay. These non-vascular plants have a flattened leaf-like body. Okay, the bottom part down here you can kind of see is flat, like a bunch of leaves kind of put together, which is called the thallus, with long structures that look like horns protruding from the thallus. Okay, this fancy word here, protruding, just means coming out of or sticking out of. So you can see kind of throughout this picture here, the flat green parts at the bottom, the thallus has these long kind of spikes sticking up. Okay, very characteristic of hornworts. Now, this is not Hogwarts. Okay, Hogwarts is the place from the Harry Potter stories, but hornworts is a type of non-vascular plant that has little horns on it, basically. Now, the interesting fact for hornworts, these are different from mosses and liverworts in that their plant cells have one single chloroplast per cell. Okay, I believe that's what you're seeing here. For example, this kind of square boxy type shape, I believe, is one of the plant cells, and I think this big guy right here is the chloroplast. Now, usually with hornworts, these chloroplasts are actually fused or kind of like melded together with other of the organelles to both manufacture and store food. So if I'm reading that correctly, it sounds like these quote-unquote chloroplasts are actually kind of like blended with with a bunch of the other organelles, and they do more than just the photosynthesis process. Whereas in the other plants, chloroplasts are only for the photosynthesis, and then the other organelles do the other jobs, like the mitochondria with the power and the vacuoles with storage and things like that. But in hornworts, it seems to be a little bit different, which is pretty interesting. So for the last part of your notes here, you got the hornworts, which there's a little bit more to this, so don't close me off just yet. But the last subtopic is the hornworts. Then the details on the right. They have leaf-like body with long horn-like structures, and they differ from mosses and liverworts because they have only one chloroplast per cell. However, it is usually fused with other organelles to both manufacture and store food. Okay, I cited my sources here. But the part I want to show you guys is this. If you have the computer, like the printed off version of the notes, you should see a Venn diagram at the bottom instead of a summary. I'm not going to have you do that on the actual notes sheet, but once you finish this video in the pod, I am going to have you enter a few things, maybe a sentence or a fact or two about vascular and non-vascular plants. Just remember that, let's say, for example, this is the vascular side and this is the non-vascular. Whatever you write over here, okay, it absolutely cannot be true of the non-vascular plants. Otherwise, it would have to go in the middle as one of the both characteristics, okay? Whatever you write for non-vascular cannot be true about vascular as well. So for example, would be a really dumb answer and I would not want to accept it, but you could not say that these are plants on the vascular side. Why? Well, because that's also true of non-vascular plants. They are plants as well. So if you're going to write this, which you're not, it would have to go into the both category. Otherwise, it could be counted wrong. Okay? Anything that you write in the vascular bubble or for the vascular characteristics has to be only true of vascular plants. It cannot be true of the other kind. Anything you put in non-vascular can only be true of non-vascular, but any characteristics you write for this middle section here, the both, okay, could be something true about both of them. For example, they're both green, usually, okay? Again, you may not use that. It is way too simple. Use your notes, give me some good facts here, but just make sure you're careful with with the facts you give me for both of them, okay? So go ahead and go on in the pod and I'll have directions there.